Hi, this is Dr. Stuckey. What I'm going to show you in this video is how to do another type of production planning model and optimize it using Solver and then look at the sensitivity using Solver table. So in the last example, we looked at what was the optimal production mix for two different products in a single run. This one is a little bit different in that we're only producing one product, but we are going to look at the optimal production plan over the period of 6 months. So the information that is on this production planning template was given to us in the problem. So this company has an initial inventory of 5,000 footballs. It is going to cost them 5% of the value of the product that they have for any product that they store. Okay, the line 8 gives the production cost per unit, and you can see that it varies from month to month. For instance, in month 1, it costs $12.50 to produce 1 unit. By month 6, it costs $12.95 to produce 1 unit. In this case, each month has the same production capacity of 30,000 units, but the demand for each month varies. And so the most simple solution would be to produce exactly the demand for the month, except that's not possible in month 4. An additional problem is that might not be the most cost-effective way to produce these footballs, and the more you can reduce costs and still sell the footballs for the same amount, then the more profit that the company makes. So that's why the optimization model is important. So the first thing that we need to do is put in the right equation so that we can put in our constraints correctly. So what we have to have on hand after production is the leftover from the on hand after production is going to be the sum of what units were produced in that month and the units that were stored for that month. So, that didn't work. So you're going to do equals, and we're going to select this B12, which is the number of units produced for month 1. We're selecting that even though it doesn't have anything in it yet. Remember, we're going to have Solver tell us what numbers should be there. Okay, and for month 1, that's going to be a little different. We're going to use our initial holding inventory. Okay, so it's going to be 5,000 because there's nothing here yet. But when we run Solver, this number is going to change. Now we have to do this one a little bit differently. As in the first one, we're going to take the number of units produced for month 2, and then to that we're going to add the ending inventory from month 1. Okay, so the ending inventory for month 1 is B20. Now again, this has not been calculated yet and won't be calculated correctly till after Solver is run. So you're just going to it's going to plug in a 0. The important thing is that you have a formula in here that's correct. If it makes you feel better to plug in numbers, you can make up numbers and plug them in. I don't care. But you can also just leave them as zeros. Again, the important thing is to have the formula correct. Now, once you have the second one done, you can copy and paste. Again, the reason you couldn't copy and paste the first time is because we pulled the initial inventory from this rather than a holding inventory, and by this one we were using the ending inventory from month 1, so it came from a different spot, so you couldn't copy and paste. Alright, so the other thing, let's identify our decision variables, and I've already been talking about them, but I haven't highlighted them. So we are going to highlight this range. It doesn't matter what color you highlight it, pick one you like and stick with it for the class, because that'll just make it easier for you if you know that these are your decision variables. And I usually recommend that you do that first. You identify first thing what your decision variables are, and that way you're not trying to calculate them with formulas and getting frustrated. You know that Solver is going to tell you these. You don't have to put in a formula to do it. There's plenty of other formulas for you to put in though. Alright, your ending inventory is going to be calculated by the number that you have on hand after production minus the demand, because you are going to sell all that you can, right? You don't want to hold them in storage if you can sell them. Now again, the number that's here is not going to be the number that is correct yet, because the solver has not told us what these numbers are, and all of these calculations are dependent on those numbers. We're just putting in the formulas. All right, after you put in this first one, you can copy and paste it all the way across. In case you need it again, what we are doing is we are taking the on-hand after production, and then we are subtracting demand from that number. Okay? Again, the numbers you have going in right now are not correct. They're not your final numbers. So now we need to get a summary of the costs. So let's first calculate your production costs. Okay, so this is a pretty simple calculation. You take the number that was actually produced that month, which again, we don't have a value for, but just select the cell that the value is going to be placed in, and then you're going to multiply that by the production cost for that month. Okay, and you copy and paste that all the way over again. Okay, so you're multiplying the number of units by what it costs to produce them that much. So in this one, for the month 1, you're doing B12 times B8. In month 2, you're doing C12 times C8. And again, these are all coming up as zeros because there's nothing plugged into those numbers yet. Okay. The next thing that you are going to calculate is the holding costs. The holding costs are calculated as a percentage of the cost to produce the inventory that actually ended up being stored. So it doesn't cost you anything if you sold it, but this ending inventory, it's going to cost you 5% in order to store. So we're going to start this formula with an equals. We're going to select this ending, start it with an equals. There you go. Okay, I had a space in there. That'll mess it up every time. All right, so we take this ending inventory, and again, this number is wrong, and it will be wrong until we run solver. Okay, but we don't know what the number is until we run solver, so don't worry about the fact that it's wrong. So we're going to take this B12 and we're going to multiply that by the cost that it to produce each of the units, and then we multiply again by 5%. So it costs 5% of the cost to produce the units that were stored. Also, it's important to make this B5 an absolute value because we don't want it to shift as we copy and paste the formula. So then we can drag this formula all the way across. Okay, and see how it has these cells that just have numbers in them and it doesn't look like, you can't see what the number is? That is just because the cell is a little bit too small, and so instead of showing a partial number where you couldn't tell if you were seeing the whole number at all, it just shows you that there's a number there but you can't see what it is. So if we just go to the side of the cell till you see this icon and double click, you can resize the columns so that you can see the numbers here. Okay, there we go. Now we are going to get the totals, and that is an equals, and we'll just sum each of those columns and then drag it all the way across, and then we will do a sum for the grand total here. Okay. And this we need to make this column bigger. This is the number that we want to minimize. In businesses, you generally want to maximize profit, minimize cost. So we are going to want to minimize this number as the cost. Now, how do I know I want to do a minimum or maximum? I read the problem carefully. If I'm talking about costs, I almost always want to do a minimum. If I'm talking about profit, I almost always want to do a maximum. You might be able to find a random exception to that, but it would be pretty rare. All right, let's go and go ahead and work on our constraints in Solver. Okay, so bring it up, and since this is the active cell, it's already going to come up as my objective cell. So my objective cell is to set H28 to a minimum. Again, you want that to be a minimum. You do not want to maximize your costs here. You want to minimize your costs by changing these cells. And again, remember, the cells you're changing are your decision cells. These are this is where Excel tells you what to do to meet your objective. Now we need to add the constraints. So the first constraint is that we cannot produce more in a given month than our production capacity. It's a fairly obvious constraint. So we make sure that this has the less than symbol. So we select units produced, and they must be less than or equal to the production capacity for the month. Okay, we're going to add another constraint that our on hand after production, the amount on hand that we have after production, needs to be greater than or equal to the demand, because if it's not greater than or equal to the demand, then we're missing out on sales. That's usually not a good idea in business. So we're going to go ahead and add that. Now we have one more constraint, and that is that our ending inventory can't be more than our storage capacity for each month. Okay, and again, you get all of this information from reading through the problem text. And if you're working in an actual situation, you're going to have to spend some time going through the constraints and figuring out what the constraints actually are and what constraints you might have some leeway in. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and push OK. Make sure that you put Simplex LP as your method for solving, and go ahead and press solve. All right, so again, we need to make these a little bit bigger. Okay, now we see that our best case scenario is that our costs are minimized at roughly 1.5 million. And in order to minimize these costs, we are going to produce 5,000 units the first month. We're going to produce 20,000 units the second month. We're going to produce 30,000 units the third month, 30,000 units the fourth month, 25,000 units the fifth month, and 10,000 units the sixth month. Now, you would not have been able to easily figure it out just by looking at these numbers, right? Okay, because these did not always match your production, although they weren't too far off, but they were not an exact match. Now what you can do is run the solver table per the instructions in your book, and then look through and interpret that output using the techniques that I taught you in the last video. I'm going to let you do this one on your own for some practice. You've got some extra information in the book that might help you a little bit more. If you have questions on this output, shoot me an email. But again, I want to give you some practice interpreting one on your own. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, please get in touch with me by phone or email. I am happy to help you. Hope you have a great evening, and God bless.